the little bar thing said pour. Good morning. Good morning. Who's in here? My earrings in. My new earrings that I got for my birthday. That my birthday was in March, but I actually got them this past weekend on Saturday. I think they're adorable. The little crocheted ferns. Maybe they don't go with my outfit, but I don't really care. Tate. Why am I such a sucker for earrings? I don't know, but I am. How was your weekend? I have a confession. I'm really embarrassed about this. Oh, and I moved this guy over here because he's looking kind of sick. So, hoping that. Let me turn the volume down on this light for a second. I'm hoping he makes a recovery, or she. I have suffered my first phone injury. I have this new phone. They are quite a bit larger, heavier than what is he chewing? Oh my God, my dog had this in his mouth, a Tootsie Roll. What is going on? And I have so much to say about him. He's on a no. He's on a rampage. He hates my guts right now. He's doing everything he can to make my life hell. And more on that in a second. Let me turn my recorder on. I keep forgetting to do. Sorry. Awkward, but let me tell you. Friday night, I was laying in bed watching something or doing something with my phone, and I had it I was laying down and I had it like above me. No, I didn't. I had it in this hand. And then like I went to move this hand, I don't know, scratch my head, something. And it knocked the phone out of my other hand, and it landed on my nose, and it hurt so bad. You can see it. Do you guys see the whatever it is, bruise, fracture? Because it felt like my nose was gonna be broken. I cried. It hurt so bad. I cried. Why are phones? I feel like we're at this weird juncture with technology. Good morning, Kelly. Like, we don't need to be carrying around like freaking miniatures flat screen televisions, do we? Anyway, that's my complaint. It hurt. It still hurts. It's like really tender. I tried to like put makeup on it, but I'm not good at makeup application, so it's still there. Walking around with a broken nose because of my phone, and I feel really dumb. Dumb and stupid. Hi, Kimberly. Welcome. How was your weekend, guys? What'd you do? So, Friday. Stop. Okay, we need to talk about my dog and how he is going through something right now. All right, so Saturday, first let me show you these peonies. The peonies are happening. Oh my God, this white one smells so good, but these pink ones don't really. I don't know what it is. And I hate to even say that I'm disappointed about a flower, because how can you be disappointed about flowers? But for months now, these have been budding, and I thought they might be red, like red peonies, which I read a book recently and I sent it to Andrew but it talks about red peonies, and I'm like, oh my God, I want red peonies in my garden. And then when these were budding, the like outer casing was really red, and I thought, oh my God, I have them. I have red peonies, but they're this magenta color. So now I'm on a mission. I need to get red peony bulbs so I can have like crimson red peonies. Anyway, these smell really good. I hope you can smell peonies this spring. Are you? You know what book I'm talking about. Which I'll have to send you something else today that I thought was synchronous from this weekend. Okay, so Saturday, smell-o-vision. I wish. Will we live long enough to see this happen? I hope. So I had my friends come over on Saturday, and this is the first time we've really had a face-to-face. We done like a couple like driveway, very distant like driveway get-togethers, if you will. But her and her husband came over, and I've like grown up with her. I mean, I've known her since oh, yummy. I was a kid. Anyway, she's more like a sister than a friend, which is nice because it's always nice to just not worry about people, you know, like we're good, we're solid, like there's no worry or like wondering. I wish everyone was like that, but unfortunately not. It's not like that. Anyway, so she hadn't come over yet because of the panty, but we're all fully vaccinated now. Yay! So that was so lovely. And then we had drinks. And so I didn't get to bed till like after 11. I know, so late. Oh, I'm old, okay. And I was ready for bed. I was ready. I overdid it. My consumption, but it wasn't like, oh, don't you love Tate's stuff? But it wasn't like whatever. I didn't think I was that bad. Well, apparently I was, but I got a automated phone call from the school system at 4:00 in the morning, yesterday morning, on Sunday morning, telling me I need to return the Chromebooks and all of that. Like, I know this has been, they have sent this out multiple times. If they were like serious, you need to do it on Monday, today, which I already knew about because they're having this like thing. But did I need a phone call at 4 a.m., 4 in the morning to remind me? And of course, I had my ringer on. So I was woken up, and it was like one of those things. Hi, Cycleman. If I was just allowed to just go to bed and then just sleep and then wake up naturally, I probably would have been fine, solid. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like, I probably would have been dehydrated and maybe a little headachy. But no, I was woken up in like maybe the middle of this whole process, and I was sick to my stomach and just felt ill. My dog was like, okay, oh good, you're awake. I need to go outside. Well, it's 4:00 in the morning. It's still dark. There's coyotes here. Like, I'm not going to let him out. And I'm like, go back to bed. He went to the bathroom in my living room, and he never does that. He never does it. He went pee. I heard it. I'm like, what is happening? So I had to get up, clean that up. Obviously, I let him out, and then he wasn't coming back in. And so after I'd cleaned it all up, I opened this window over here to yell at him, like, come back inside. So I did, and he's coming running, right? I closed the window, and the curtain rod fell on my head. It was like one thing after another. Then I got sick. So I went and I took a shower. Sorry if this is TMI, but I thought it was funny too. I thought it was really funny, my whole morning. my whole weekend apparently, like head injuries and like just weird stuff. Um, and then when I come out, I lay down and I hear a crash just as I lay down, like something's broken. Like the animals have knocked something off. I don't even know what. And I'm still like so sick that I'm like, I'll deal with it when I get up. I got up and Friday had eaten my dog had eaten a bunch of grass and had gotten sick on the floor again. So I had that mess to clean up. And then they had knocked over one of my potted plants and broke a plant. Anyway, it was like I wasn't feeling well, and I wasn't feeling well. Even if I was feeling fine, I would have been super frustrated. But it was like I was enough that I was just like, wow, this is life. And I just cleaned up everything. And I don't know. Has anything like this happened to you guys? It felt so weird. And I know, I had such a good time on Saturday. And then I woke up and it was just like, but he's been chewing stuff and like just acting out. And I'm so frustrated with him. I'm so frustrated. I'm trying to exercise him more. I know. I'm trying to exercise him more and like give him more attention. No, he's like, I don't know what it is. He's revolting. He's revolting against me, and he is physically revolting, and he's shedding. Anyway, I'm sorry I'm getting on here and like complaining, but it was funny. It was funny. I had to even laugh. I was going through it and feeling sick and like having to deal with this stuff, but at the time it was funny to me. Still, who's ready to read this? How can he not? How can he not be? What, should I turn him loose so he's a wild animal? He has sort of like a dingo, wild dog look about him. If you've ever seen pictures, I have some on my Instagram if you want to look at what he looks like. All right, are we ready to read this? Does Anne ever get back to school? Does she ever go back? Maybe we'll find out now. Who's ready? Now that I've told you all my woes, I have a broken nose. I broke my crown on the curtain rod. All right. Chapter 16. Diana is invited to tea with tragic results. Oh my gosh. Hold your horses. I think I remember this. What happens? October was a beautiful month at Green Gables, when the birches in the hollow turned as golden as sunshine, and the maples behind the orchard were royal crimson, and the wild cherry trees along the lane put on the lovely shades of dark red and bronzy green, while the fields sunned themselves in aftermaths. Oh my gosh. Anne reveled in the world of color about her. "Oh, Marilla," she exclaimed one Saturday morning, coming dancing in with her arms full of gorgeous boughs. "I'm so glad I live in a world where there are Octobers." I already told you that's one of my favorite lines, and I say it every year just to be extra or basic or nerdy. It would be terrible if we just skipped from September to November, wouldn't it? Look at these maple branches. Don't they give you a thrill, several thrills? I'm going to decorate my room with them. Messy thing, said Marilla, whose aesthetic sense was not noticeably developed. You clutter up your room entirely too much with out-of-doors stuff, Anne. Bedrooms were made to sleep in. Let's see. Whoops. I can relate. I can very much relate. Who else? Like these are specifically staying in my bedroom here because they smell good and I want to smell them when I'm sleeping and dreaming. Oh, Oh, and dream in too, Marilla. And I'm sorry. Bedrooms were made to sleep in, Anne. Oh, and dream in too, Marilla. And one can dream so much better in a room where there are pretty things. I'm going to put these boughs in the old blue jug and set them on my table. Oh, can you picture it? Like the red and the gold and the green and a blue jug. Mind you don't drop leaves all over the stairs then. I'm going to a meeting of the AIDS Society at Carmody this afternoon, Anne. I won't likely be home before dark. You'll have to get Matthew and Jerry their supper, so mind you don't forget to put the tea to draw until you sit down at the tables, as you did last time. It was dreadful of me to forget, said Anne apologetically, but that was the afternoon I was trying to think of a name for Violet Vale, and it crowded other things out. Matthew was so good. He never scolded a bit. He put the tea down himself and said we could wait a while as not, and I told him a lovely fairy story while we were waiting, so he didn't find the time long at all. It was a beautiful fairy story, Marilla. I forgot the end of it, so I made up an end for it myself, and Matthew said he couldn't tell where the join came in. Matthew would think it all right, Anne, if you took a notion to get up and have dinner in the middle of the night, but you keep your wits about you this time, and I don't really know if I'm doing right. It may make you more addle-pated than ever, but here we go. You can ask Diana to come over and spend the afternoon with you and have tea here. A visit from friends? Oh, Marilla, Anne clasped her hands. How perfectly lovely. You are able to imagine things after all, or else you'd never have understood how I've longed for that very thing. It would seem so nice and grown-uppish. No fear of forgetting to put the tea to draw when I have company. Oh, Marilla, can I use the rosebud spray tea set? No, indeed, the rosebud tea set. Well, what next? You know I never used that except for the or the aids. You'll put down the old brown tea set, but you can open the little yellow crock of cherry preserves. It's time it was being used anyhow. I believe it's beginning to go. And you can cut some fruit cake and have some of the cookies and snaps. I can just imagine myself sitting down at the head of the table and pouring out the tea, said Anne, shutting her eyes ecstatically, and asking Diana if she takes sugar. I know she doesn't, but of course I'll ask her just as if I didn't know, and then pressing her to take another piece of fruit cake and another helping of preserves. Oh, Marilla, it's such a wonderful sensation just to think of it. Can I take her into the spare room to lay off her hat when she comes, and then into the parlor to sit? No, the sitting room will do for you and your company, but there's a bottle of half-full raspberry cordial that was left over from the church social the other night. It's on the second shelf of the sitting room closet, and you and Diana can have it if you like, and a cookie to eat with it along it in the afternoon, for I dare say Matthew will be late coming into tea since he's hauling potatoes to the vessel. Anne fled down the hollow, past the Dryad's bubble, and up the spruce path to the orchard slope to ask Diana to tea. As a result, just after Marilla had driven off to Carmody, Diana came over, dressed in her second best dress, and looking exactly as it is proper to look when asked out to tea. At other times, she won't run into the kitchen. She was wont to run into the kitchen without knocking, but now she knocked primly at the front door, and when Anne, dressed in her second best, as primly opened it, both little girls shook hands as gravely as they had never met before. This unnatural solemnity lasted until after Diana had been taken to the east gable to lay off her hat, and then had sat for 10 minutes in the sitting room, toes in position. Oh, they are just proper grown-up ladies, aren't they? How is your mother? Inquired Anne politely, just as if she had not seen Mrs. Barry picking apples that morning in excellent health and spirits. She is very well, thank you. I suppose Mr. Cuthbert is hauling potatoes to the lily sands this afternoon, is he? Said Diana, who had ridden down to Mr. Harmon Andrews that morning in Matthew's cart. Yes, our potato crop is very good this year. I hope your father's potato crop is good too. It is fairly good, thank you. Have you picked many of your apples yet? Oh, ever so many, said Anne, forgetting to be dignified and jumping up quickly. Let's go out to the orchard and get some of the red sweetings, Diana. Marilla says we can have all that are left in the tree. Marilla is a very generous woman. She said we could have fruitcake and cherry preserves for tea, but it isn't good manners to tell your company what you're going to give them to eat, so I won't tell you what she said we could have to drink. Only it begins with an R and a C, and it's bright red color. I love bright red drinks, don't you? They taste twice as good as any other color. I just love how um, they're at this age where they still pretend a lot, and they're still like making believe, like in this land of make believe, and now they're like making believe that they are adults. Like they've like it's more make believe to leave their fantasy world and come into like the adult world. Um, so funny and cute. The orchard, with its great sweeping boughs that bent to the ground with fruit, proved so delightful that the little girls spent most of the afternoon in it, sitting in a grassy corner where the frost had spared the green and the mellow autumn sunshine lingered warmly, eating apples and talking as hard as they could. Diana had much to tell Anne of what went on in school. She had to sit with Gertie Pye, and she hated it. Gertie squeaked her pencil all the time, and it just made her, Diana's, blood run cold. Ruby Gillis had charmed all her warts away. True as you live, with a magic pebble that old Mary Joe from the creek gave her. You had to rub the warts with the pebble and then throw it over your left shoulder at the time of the new moon, and the warts would all go. Charlie Sloane's name was written up with M. White on the porch wall, and M. White was awful mad about it. Sam Bolter had sassed Mr. Phillips in class, and Mr. Phillips whipped him, and Sam's father came down to the school and dared Mr. Phillips to lay a hand on one of his children again. And Maddie Andrews had a new red hood and a blue crossover with tassels on it, and the airs she put on about it were perfectly sickening. And Lizzie Wright didn't speak to Mamie Wilson because Mamie Wilson's grown-up sister had cut out Lizzie Wright's grown-up sister with her bow, and everybody missed Anne. So she wished she'd come to school again, and Gilbert Blythe, but Anne did not want to hear about Gilbert Blythe. She had jumped up hurriedly and said, suppose they go in and have some raspberry cordial. Anne looked at the second shelf of the room pantry, but there was no bottle of raspberry cordial there. Search revealed it way back on the top shelf. Anne put it on a tray and set it on the table with a tumbler. Now, please help yourself, Diana, she said politely. I don't believe I'll have any just now. I don't feel as if I wanted any after all those apples. Diana poured herself out a tumblerful, looked at its bright red hue admiringly, and then sipped it daintily. That's awfully nice raspberry cordial, Anne, she said. I didn't know raspberry cordial was so nice. I'm glad you like it. Take as much as you want. I'm going to run out and stir the fire up. There are so many responsibilities on a person's mind when they're keeping house, isn't there? When Anne came back from the kitchen, Diana was drinking her second glassful of cordial and being entreated thereto by Anne. She offered no particular objection to the drinking of a third. The tumblerfuls were generous ones, and the raspberry cordial was certainly very nice. The nicest I ever drank, said Diana. It's ever so much nicer than Mrs. Lynde's, although she brags of hers so much. It doesn't taste a bit like hers. I should think Marilla's raspberry cordial would probably be much nicer than Mrs. Lynde's, said Anne loyally. Marilla is a famous cook. She tried to teach me to cook, but I assure you, Diana, it's uphill work. There's so little scope for the imagination in cookery. You just have to go by the rules. The last time I made a cake, I forgot to put the flour in. I was thinking the loveliest story about you and me, Diana. I thought you were desperately ill with smallpox and everybody deserted you. But I went boldly to your bedside and nursed you back to life. And then I took the smallpox and died. And I was buried under those poplar trees in the graveyard. And you planted a rose bush by my grave and watered it with your tears. And you never, never forgot the friend of your youth who sacrificed her life for you. Oh, it was such a pathetic little tale, Diana. The tears just rained down over my cheeks while I mixed the cake. But I forgot the flour, and the cake was a dismal failure. Flour is so essential to cakes, you know. Marilla was very cross, and I don't wonder. I'm a great trial to her. She was terribly mortified about the pudding sauce last week. We had a plum pudding for dinner on Tuesday, and there was half the pudding and a pitcherful of sauce left over. Marilla said there was enough for another dinner and told me to set it on the pantry shelf and cover it. I meant to cover it just as much as could be, Diana. But when I carried it in, I was imagining I was a nun. Of course, I'm a Protestant, but I imagined I was a Catholic, taking the veil to bury a broken heart in cloistered seclusion, and I forgot all about covering the pudding sauce. I almost said pudding. I thought of it next morning and ran to the pantry. Diana, fancy, if you can, my extreme horror at finding a mouse drowned in that pudding sauce. I lifted the mouse out with a spoon and threw it out in the yard and then washed the spoon in 3 waters. Marilla was out milking, and I fully intended to ask her when she came in if I'd give the sauce to the pigs. But when she did come in, I was imagining that I was a frost fairy going through the woods, turning the trees red and yellow, whichever they wanted to be. So I never thought about the pudding sauce again, and Marilla sent me out to pick apples. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Chester Ross from Spencervale came here that morning. You know they are very stylish people, especially Mrs. Chester Ross. When Marilla called me in, dinner was all ready and everybody was at the table. I tried to be as polite and dignified as I could be, for I wanted Mrs. Chester Ross to think I was a ladylike little girl, even if I wasn't pretty. I know, right, Kelly? Just wait. Everything went right until I saw Marilla coming with the plum pudding in one hand and the pitcher of pudding sauce warmed up in the other. Diana, that was a terrible moment. I remembered everything, and I just stood up in my place and shrieked out, Marilla, you mustn't use that pudding sauce. There was a mouse drowned in it. I forgot to tell you before. In front of special company, too. Oh, Diana, I shall never forget that awful moment if I live to be 100. Mrs. Chester Ross just looked at me and thought I would sink through the floor with mortification. She is such a perfect housekeeper, and fancy what she might have thought of us. Marilla turned red as fire, but she never said a word then. She just carried that sauce and pudding out and brought in some strawberry preserves. She even offered me some, but I couldn't swallow a mouthful. It was like heaping coals of fire on my head. After Mrs. Chester Ross went away, Marilla gave me a dreadful scolding. Why, Diana, what is the matter? Diana had stood up. Okay, guys, brace yourselves. I'm going to remind you that this was published in 1908. So around the turn of the century. Can you all think of what's happening historically in North America around the turn of the century? Diana had stood up very unsteadily. Then she sat down again, putting her hands to her head. I'm awful sick, she said, a little thickly. I must go right home. Oh, you mustn't dream of going home without your tea, cried Anne in distress. I'll get it right off. I'll go and put the tea down this very minute. I must go home, repeated Diana, stupidly but determinedly. Let me get you a lunch anyhow, implored Anne. Let me get you a bit of fruit cake and some of the cherry preserves. Lie down on the sofa for a little while and you'll be better. Where do you feel bad? I must go home, said Diana, and that was all she would say. In vain Anne pleaded. I never heard of company going home without tea, she mourned. Oh, Diana, do you suppose it's possible you're really taking the smallpox? If you are, I'll go and nurse you. You can depend on that. I'll never forsake you. But I do wish you'd stay till after tea. Where do you feel bad? I'm awful dizzy, said Diana. And indeed, she walked very dizzily. Anne, with tears of disappointment. What do you think's happening? With tears of disappointment in her eyes, got Diana's hat and went with her as far as the Berry yard fence. Then she wept all the way back to Green Gables, where she sorrowfully put the remainder of the raspberry cordial back into the pantry and got tea ready for Matthew and Jerry, with all the zest gone out of her performance. The next day was Sunday, and as the rain poured down in torrents from dawn till dusk, Anne did not stir abroad from Green Gables. Monday afternoon, Marilla sent her down to Mrs. Lynde's on an errand. In a very short space of time, Anne came flying back up the lane with tears rolling down her cheeks. Into the kitchen she dashed and flung herself face downwards on the sofa in an agony. Whatever has gone wrong now, Anne? Queried Marilla, in doubt and dismay, sorry. I do hope you haven't gone and been saucy to Mrs. Lynde again. No answer from Anne save more tears and stormier sobs. Anne Shirley, when I ask you a question, I want to be answered. Sit right up this very minute and tell me what you're crying about. Anne sat up, tragedy personified. Mrs. Lynde was up to see Mrs. Barry today, and Mrs. Barry was in an awful state, she wailed. She says that I set Diana drunk Saturday and sent her home in a disgraceful condition. And she says I must be a thoroughly bad, wicked little girl, and she's never, never going to let Diana play with me again. Oh, Marilla, I'm just overcome with woe. I find it hilarious that I opened this broadcast with a story about myself on Saturday this weekend. And this is the chapter we're reading. Marilla stared in blank amazement. Not planned, I promise. Set Diana drunk, she said when she found her voice. Anne, are you or Mrs. Barry crazy? What on earth did you give her? Not a thing but raspberry cordial, sobbed Anne. I never thought raspberry cordial would set people drunk. Marilla, not even if they drank 3 big tumblerfuls as Diana did. Oh, it sounds so like Mrs. Thomas's husband, but I didn't mean to set her drunk. Drunk fiddlesticks, said Marilla, marching to the sitting room pantry. There on the shelf was a bottle which she at once recognized as the one containing some of her 3-year-old homemade currant wine, for which she was celebrated in Avonlea, although certain of the stricter sort, Mrs. Barry among them, disapproved strongly of it. And at the same time, Marilla recollected that she had put the bottle of raspberry cordial down in the cellar instead of the pantry as she had told Anne. She went back to the kitchen with the wine bottle in her hand. Her face was twitching in spite of herself. Anne, you certainly have a genius for getting into trouble. You went and gave Diana currant wine instead of raspberry cordial. Didn't you know the difference yourself? I never tasted it, said Anne. I thought it was the cordial. I meant to be so hospitable. Diana got awfully sick and had to go home. Mrs. Barry told Mrs. Lynde she was simply dead drunk. She just laughed, silly like, when her mother asked her what was the matter, and went to sleep and slept for hours. Her mother smelled her breath, and she knew she was drunk. She had a fearful headache all day. Mrs. Barry is so indignant, but she will never believe what I did it on purpose. Okay. Anyway, I should think she would better punish Diana for being so greedy as to drink 3 glassfuls of anything, said Marilla shortly. Why 3 of those big glasses would have made her sick, even if it had only been cordial. Well, this story will be a nice handle for those folks who are so down on me for making currant wine. And if you'll recall, as if you were born living during that time, but this was during there was a huge temperance movement during this time, as we're leading up into the first part of the 20th century. There's and a lot of like radical feminists at the time were hardcore temperance, pro-temperance. Anyway, I just kept the bottle. Okay, I haven't made any for 3 years, ever since I found out the minister didn't approve. I just kept that bottle for sickness. There, child, don't cry. I can't see as you were to blame, although I'm sorry it happened so. I must cry, said Anne. My heart is broken. The stars in their courses fight against me, Marilla. Diana and I are parted forever. Oh, Marilla, I dreamed of this when we first swore our vows of friendship. Don't be foolish, Anne. Mrs. Barry will think better of it when she finds you're not really to blame. I suppose she thinks you've done it for a silly joke or something of that sort. You best go up this evening and tell her how it was. My courage fails me at the thought of facing Diana's injured mother, sighed Anne. I wish you'd go, Marilla. You're so much more dignified than I am. Likely she'll listen to you quicker than me. Well, I will, said Marilla, reflecting that it would probably be the wiser course. Don't cry any more, Anne. It will be all right. Marilla had changed her mind about its being all right by the time she got back from Orchard Slope. Anne was watching for her coming, and flew to the porch door to meet her. Oh, Marilla, I know by your face it's been no use, she said sorrowfully. Mrs. Barry won't forgive me. Mrs. Barry, indeed, snapped Marilla. Of all the unreasonable women I ever saw, she's the worst. I told her it was all a mistake and that you weren't to blame, but she just simply didn't believe me, and she rubbed it well in about my currant wine and how I'd always said it couldn't have the least effect on anybody. I just told her plainly that currant wine wasn't meant to be drunk 3 tumblerfuls at a time, and that if a child I had to go that if a child I had to do with was so greedy, I'd sober her up with a right good spanking. Marilla whisked into the kitchen, grievously disturbed, leaving a very much distracted little soul in the porch behind her. Presently Anne stepped out bareheaded into the chill autumn dusk. Very determinedly and steadily she took her way down through the sere clover field on the log over the log bridge and up through the spruce grove, lighted by a pale little moon hanging low over the western woods. Mrs. Barry, coming to the door in answer to a timid knock, found a white-lipped, eager-eyed suppliant on the doorstep. Her face hardened. Mrs. Barry was a woman of strong prejudices and dislikes, and her anger was of the cold, sullen sort, which is always hardest to overcome. To do her justice, she really believed Anne had made Diana drunk, out of sheer malice prepense, and she was honestly anxious to preserve her little daughter from the contamination of further intimacy with such a child. "What do you want?" she said stiffly. Anne clasped her hands. "Oh, Mrs. Barry, please forgive me. I did not mean to intoxicate Diana. How could I? Just imagine if you were a poor little orphan girl that kind people had adopted and you had just one bosom friend in all the world. Do you think you would intoxicate her on purpose? I thought it was only raspberry cordial. I was firmly convinced of it. It was raspberry cordial. Oh, please don't say you won't let Diana play with me anymore. If you do, you will cover my life with a dark cloud of woe." This speech, which would have softened good Mrs. Lynde's heart in a twinkling, had no effect on Mrs. Barry except to irritate her still more. She was suspicious of Anne's big words and dramatic gestures, and imagined that the child was making fun of her. So she said coldly and cruelly, "I don't think you're a fit little girl for Diana to associate with. You'd better go home and behave yourself." Anne's lip quivered. "Won't you let me see Diana just once to say farewell?" she implored. "Diana has gone over to Carmody with her father," said Mrs. Barry, going in and shutting the door. Anne went back to Green Gables, calm with despair. "My last hope is gone," she told Marilla. "I went up and saw Mrs. Barry myself, and she treated me very insultingly. Marilla, I do not think she's a well-bred woman. There's nothing more to do except to pray, and I haven't hope that'll do much good, because, Marilla, I don't believe that God himself can do very much with such an obstinate person as Mrs. Barry." "Anne, you shouldn't say such things," rebuked Marilla, striving to overcome that unholy tendency to laughter which she was dismayed to find growing upon her. And indeed, when she told the whole story to Matthew that night, she did laugh heartily over Anne's tribulations. But when she slipped to the east gable before going to bed and found that Anne had cried herself to sleep, an unaccustomed softness crept into her face. "Poor little soul," she murmured, lifting a loose curl of hair from Anne's tear-stained face. Then she bent down and kissed the flushed cheek on the pillow. Oh my goodness, what do you think, everybody? Now what? Is anyone still here? Am I still broadcasting? Do I read another little chapter? There's another tiny little chapter before kind of like something dramatic happens. Should I read another one? We have a few minutes. I'm going to come back tomorrow. I'm broadcasting every day this week, not next week though. So we'll see how far we get. Okay, awesome. A new interest in life. I feel like preaching a little bit about being a victim, having victim mindset, but maybe I'll wait till another time. The next afternoon, Anne, bending over her patchwork at the kitchen window, happened to glance out and beheld Diana down by the Dryad's Bubble, beckoning mysteriously. In a trice, Anne was out of the house and flying down to the hollow, astonishment and hope struggling. I'm inventing words today. Struggling in her expressive eyes, but the hope faded when she saw Diana's dejected countenance. "Your mother hasn't relented?" she gasped. Diana shook her head mournfully. No, and oh, and she says I'm never to play with you again. I've cried and cried, and I told her it wasn't your fault, but it wasn't any use. I've had ever such a time coaxing her to let me come down and say goodbye to you. She said I was only to stay 10 minutes, and she's timing me by the clock. 10 minutes isn't very long to say an eternal farewell in, said Anne tearfully. Oh, Diana, will you promise faithfully never to forget me, the friend of your youth, no matter what dearer friends may caress thee? Indeed I will, sobbed Anne, and I'll never have another bosom friend. I don't want to have. I couldn't love anybody as I love you. Oh, Diana, cried Anne, clasping her hands, do you love me? Why, of course I do. Don't you know that? No. Anne drew a long breath. I thought you liked me, but of course I never hoped you loved me. Why, Diana, I didn't think anybody could love me. Nobody has ever loved me since I can remember. Oh, this is wonderful. It's a ray of light which will forever shine on the darkness of a path severed from thee, Diana. Oh, just say it once again. I love you devotedly, Anne, said Diana staunchly, and I always will. You may be sure of that. And I will always love thee, Diana, said Anne solemnly, extending her hand. In the years to come, thy memory will shine like a star over my lonely life. As that last story we read together says, Diana, wilt thou give me a lock of thy jet black tresses and parting to treasure forevermore? Have you got anything to cut it with? Queried Diana, wiping away the tears which Anne's affecting accents had caused to flow afresh and returning to practicalities. Yes, I've got my patchwork scissors in my apron pocket, fortunately, said Anne. She solemnly clipped one of Diana's curls. Fare thee well, my beloved friend. Henceforth we must be as strangers, though living side by side, but my heart will ever be faithful to thee. Anne stood and watched Diana out of sight, mournfully waving her hand to the latter whenever she turned to look back. Then she returned to the house, not a little consoled for the time being by this romantic parting. It is all over, she informed Marilla. I shall never have another friend. I'm really worse off than ever before, for I haven't Katie Maurice and Violetta now. And even if I hadn't, it wouldn't be this. Even if I had, it wouldn't be the same. Somehow, little dream girls are not as satisfying after a real friend. Diana and I had such an affecting farewell down by the spring. It will be sacred in my memory forever. I used the most pathetic language I could think of and said thou and thee seems so much more romantic than you. Diana gave me a lock of her hair, and I'm going to sew it up in a little bag and wear it around my neck all my life. Please see that it is buried with me, for I don't believe I'll live very long. Perhaps when she sees me lying cold and dead before her, Mrs. Barry may feel remorse for what she has done and will let Diana come to my funeral. I don't think there's much fear of your dying of grief, as long as you can talk, Anne, said Marilla unsympathetically. The following Monday, Anne surprised Marilla by coming down from her room with her basket of books on her arm and her lips primmed up into a line of determination. I'm going back to school, she announced. That is all there is left in life for me, now that my friend has been ruthlessly torn from me. In school, I can look at her and muse over days departed. You'd better muse over your lessons in some, said Marilla, concealing her delight at this development of the situation. If you're going back to school, I hope we'll hear no more of breaking slates over people's heads and such carryings on. Behave yourself and do just what your teacher tells you. Although, pause, it sounds like the teacher is an absolute menace since one of the other kids' fathers had to come down and threaten to beat his, you know what, if he touched his kid again. I'll try. It's so it's so comforting to know that like this kind of like dynamic parent teacher dynamic was going on back in like the one room schoolhouse days of Prince Edward Island, Canada. I'll try to be a model pupil, agreed Anne dolefully. There won't be much fun in it, and I expect. Mr. Phillips said Minnie Andrews was a model pupil, and there isn't a spark of imagination or life in her. She's just dull and poky and never seems to have a good time. But I feel so depressed that perhaps it will come easy to me now. I'm going round by the road. I couldn't bear to go by the birch path all alone. I should weep bitter tears if I did. Anne was welcomed back to school with open arms. Her imagination had been sorely missed in games, her voice in the singing, and her dramatic ability in the perusal aloud of books at dinner hour. Ruby Gillis smuggled 3 blue plums over to her during Testament reading. Ella May McPherson gave her an enormous yellow pansy cut from the covers of a floral catalogue, a species of desk decoration much prized in Avonlea school. Sophia Sloane offered to teach her a perfectly elegant new pattern of knit lace, so nice for trimming aprons. Katie Bolter gave her a perfume bottle to keep slate water in, and Julia Bell copied carefully on a piece of pale pink paper, scalloped on the edges, the following effusion. To Anne. When twilight drops her curtain down and pins it with a star, remember that you have a friend, though she may wander far. It's so nice to be appreciated, sighed Anne rapturously to Marilla that night. The girls were not the only scholars who appreciated her. When Anne went to her seat after dinner hour, she had been told by Mr. Phillips to sit with the model Minnie Andrews. She found on her desk a big, luscious strawberry apple. Anne caught it up all ready to take a bite, when she remembered that the only place in Avonlea where strawberry apples grew was in the old Blythe orchard on the other side of the Lake of Shining Waters. Anne dropped the apple as if for a red-hot coal and ostentatiously wiped her fingers on her handkerchief. The apple lay untouched on her desk until the next morning, when little Timothy Andrews, who swept the school and kindled the fire, annexed it as one of his perquisites. Charlie Sloane's slate pencil, gorgeously bedizened with striped red and yellow paper, costing 2 cents, where ordinary pencils cost only 1, which he set up to her after dinner hour, met with a more favorable reception. Anne was graciously pleased to accept it and reward the donor with a smile which exalted that infatuated youth straightway into the 7th heaven of delight, and caused him to make such fearful errors in his dictation that Mr. Phillips kept him in after school to rewrite it. But as the Caesar's pageant shorn of Brutus's bust did but Rome's best son remind her more, so marked the absence of any tribute or recognition from Diana Barry, who was sitting with Gertie Pye, embittered Anne's little triumph. Diana might have just smiled at me once, I think, she mourned to Marilla that night, but the next morning a note, most fearfully and wonderfully twisted and folded, and a small parcel were passed across to Anne. Did any of you write notes to people in school? I was rabid about it. I always did. I had like, I had several people that I wrote to, and so like I had like a schedule, like I would write somebody some hour, and then the next person like the next subject, and sometimes multiple notes a day because you couldn't talk. I mean, now I guess kids have texts and things, so you don't have to pass notes, but I miss those days. Dear Anne, ran the former, Mother says I'm not to play with you or talk to you, even in school. It isn't my fault, and don't be cross at me because I love you as much as ever. I miss you awfully to tell all my secrets to, and I don't like Gertie Pye one bit. I made you one of the new bookmarks out of red tissue paper. They're awfully fashionable now, and only 3 girls in school know how to make them. When you look at it, remember your true friend, Diana Barry. Oh my gosh, how wonderful. Yeah, we'd always like reuse notes. Like you'd start the note at the top and then they would continue it. So it would be like a conversation. Anne read the note, kissed the bookmark, and dispatched a prompt reply back to the other side of the school. My own darling Diana, of course I'm not cross at you because you have to obey your mother. Our spirits can commune. I shall keep your lovely present forever. Minnie Andrews is a very nice little girl, although she has no imagination. But after having been Diana's bosom friend, I cannot be Minnie's. Please excuse mistakes because my spelling isn't very good yet, although very much improved. Yours until death do us part, Anne, or Cordelia Shirley. P.S. I shall keep with your letter under my pillow tonight. A or C.S. Marilla pessimistically expected more trouble since Anne had begun to go to school, but none developed. Perhaps Anne caught something of the model spirit from Minnie Andrews. At least she got on very well with Mr. Phillips thenceforth. She flung herself into her studies, heart and soul, determined not to be outdone in any class by Gilbert Blythe. Oh, spite. Oh my gosh. It started to rain like a downpour. I have to get up and close my window. The rivalry between them was soon apparent. It was entirely good-natured on Gilbert's side, but it is much to be feared that the same thing cannot be said of Anne, who had certainly an unpraiseworthy tenacity for holding grudges. She was as intense in her hatreds as in her loves. She would not stoop to admit that she meant to rival Gilbert in schoolwork, because that would have been to acknowledge his existence. Which Anne persistently ignored, but the rivalry was there, and honors fluctuated between them. Now Gilbert was head of the spelling class. Now Anne, with a toss of her long red braids, spelled him down. She flipped her hair and spelled him down. One morning, Gilbert had all his sums done correctly and had his name written on the blackboard on the roll of honor. The next morning, Anne, having wrestled wildly with decimals the entire evening before, would be first. One awful day, they were ties, and their names were written up together. It was almost as bad as to take notice, and Anne's mortification was as evident as Gilbert's satisfaction. When the written examinations at the end of each month were held, the suspense was terrible. The first month, Gilbert came out 3 marks ahead. The second, Anne beat him by 5. But her triumph was marred by the fact that Gilbert congratulated her heartily before the whole school. It would have been ever so much sweeter to her if he had felt the sting of his defeat. Mr. Phillips might not be a very good teacher, but a pupil so inflexibly determined on learning as Anne could hardly escape making progress under any kind of teacher. But by the end of the term, Anne and Gilbert were both promoted into the 5th class and allowed to begin studying the elements of the branches by which Latin, geometry, French, and algebra were meant. In geometry, Anne met her Waterloo. It's perfectly awful stuff, Marilla, she groaned. I'm sure I'll never be able to make head or tail of it. There is no scope for the imagination in it at all. Mr. Phillips says I'm the worst dunce he ever saw at it, and some of the others are so smart at it. It is extremely mortifying, Marilla. Even Diana gets along better than I do, but I don't mind being beaten by Diana. Although we meet as strangers now, I still love her with an inextinguishable love. It makes me very sad at times to think about her, but really, Marilla, one can't stay sad very long in such an interesting world, can one? And that is chapter 17, and that will do our reading today. Something has got to give in the immortal Grateful Dead song, which I can't remember the title of the song. But the refrain, the lyric is, one way or the other, the light has got to give, or something like that. I butchered that now. What do we think? Gilbert Blythe is just as much in love with her as before, right? If he can't win her one way, he's going to win her another, right? Being the smartest. All right, everyone. Have a lovely rest of the day. I will see you There's no other girl. Well, I think some of the other girls are. But they are all mixed ages in there. I don't know. I'm pretty sure some of the other people are, because I feel like at the end of the book, things happen at the same time, and they are the same. It might be Gertie Pye might be the same age as them. It's just not the same, Tate. It's not the same. Your best friends, indistinguishable loves, and don't you think it's funny how Mrs. Barry is like, she uses large words, but if you'll recall the beginning of the book, when we were learning about Diana and how Diana loves to read and how her father buys her books. Are you guys seeing Crookshanks' face right now? I just noticed it. Oh my god, look at him. Anyway, her father was buying her a bunch of books, but her mother thought it was like a disgusting habit. And so like the mother probably doesn't even understand, even though they're very wealthy. They're like the wealthiest people in Avonlea. Um, her mother is like really ignorant and um, fundamental or whatever. Anyway, that's a good setup for tomorrow's chapter. Thank you so much, friends. Thank you so much. She so she thought Anne was like using big words as like to make fun of her because she's a child and Mrs. Barry is an adult and she probably doesn't even understand the words that Anne was using. Anyway, what we have here is some kind of failure, communication failure, right? All right, friends. Yes, exactly. Exactly. She's intimidated. She feels threatened. I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you for coming in. It was nice to get two chapters done. All right, looking forward to tomorrow. Bye.